down that camera and strap in. It's time for a new episode of TogChat Live. Get ready for 60 minutes of wall-to-wall photography, including photo news, tog tips, and image reviews to help you improve your photography. Here's your host, Joe Edelman.
Hey gang, how we all doing? It is Wednesday night, and unlike last Wednesday night, the technology is working, so I am here with you. Fortunately, YouTube's not having any issues, so we've got our Wednesday night stream live, and this is going to be the first of our Wednesday night Q&A night. So it's a little bit different. Hopefully you guys got a little bit of a kick out of that intro. It's a work in progress. I've told you guys before, I'm a big believer in the entrepreneurial version of break stuff and keep working on it. So I literally just got that sound bite back today from the DJ that's recording it from me, or for me, and I decided to kind of throw together a quick video piece. I've got a similar concept planned, and there's actually 3 different versions of those intros. So the intro that you heard tonight, full disclosure, is actually the Monday night intro. There is a Wednesday night one coming and a Thursday night one coming, but I figured, hey, I'd share it with you guys. And just so you know why I did it, so you don't think I'm all kind of going crazy and like Hollywood in the process, I am going to be taking the sound piece of these 60-minute talk chats and posting them as podcasts. Some people like to be able to just listen. Now, granted, it's a photography one, but these Wednesday night ones especially, and also the Thursday night marketing ones are actually pretty good for doing a podcast, because tonight I'm not going to be reviewing pictures. I'll be talking about photography, but I'm not showing photography and looking at photography. So that's a big part of why I had those done. So it's basically a 30-second intro like you would have in a podcast. And so stay tuned, because that means there's also an outro at the end of the evening. So you'll get to hear that. But anyway, tonight, guys, it's Q&A night. So before I say anything else, just a reminder, start loading those questions, okay? It's your night. Open mic. I'm here to answer questions. We're going to talk about whatever you want to talk about. I have a few things to start out with, so I'll get the ball rolling, but it's your night. So tell me what you want to talk about. So a couple little pieces of business, though, just so we're not missing out on the important stuff. If you haven't been to YouTube yet this week, please make sure that you check out the YouTube channel. There are 2 new videos up from last weekend. One is the How to Shoot a Fitness Magazine cover. The other one is the best way to shoot tethered. And of course, Monday night's TogChat is live, and it's there for you to review. So hopefully you will check that out. And, you know, God forbid, if you're bored and you just can't get enough of Joe, you can always click on that video tab and you can go back through all kinds of old videos that have been around forever. You guys might notice they're all starting to come together. We've got the new designs for the thumbnail. So a lot of cool stuff happening, stuff that I'm pretty excited about. It's really kind of finally starting to fall into place. Now we've got the Wednesday night talk chat, and I'll be here tomorrow night for a Thursday night marketing one. So that's what's happened. And of course, you can see the chat in the window. You guys might notice, if you've been in the last couple of these, somebody pointed out to me that it's really hard reading the chat at the font size that I had it. So I've got it a little bit larger. We're going to try the bigger font on the chat, and we'll see how that goes. So actually, you guys are great. Instead of me talking about the things I was going to start with, I'll get to them later. Let me start with some of these questions. So Mitch has got a question. When you choose to do touch-ups on portraits versus shooting perfect in camera and not doing any touch-up at all. So, you know, Mitch, that's a great question. And it's a question that it's actually kind of becoming a pet issue of mine. So Mitch happened to stumble onto one of the 2 things that I was going to talk to you guys about. So the problem that you run into here, Mitch, is I find that, so please humor me in that I'm going to take your question, Mitch, and go with a little bit of a broader answer to give you the answer. I'm finding that a lot of what's happening is, especially with beginners, and it's understandable, so it's not a gripe. I'm looking for the solution. People want kind of that easy answer, that answer that says, this is how you do it. Done. And for those of you that have been shooting for a while and learning for a while, you've already figured out 90% of the time there is no, this is how you do it, done. there are so many variables that come into play. So that being said, Mitch, follow along here and I'll give you the best version of that answer that I can, okay? For me, I don't ever want to do any more Photoshop than is necessary. Now, if you listen to that statement and you walk off with your answer, you're missing some of the important parts. That being said, pretty much any portrait that I do, I am going to retouch blemishes. Most people have some blemishes on their skin. And when we say a blemish, it doesn't necessarily mean a zit. It could be, like one of these little bumps like I have now that I'm getting older, that kind of stuff. It could be a scratch. It could be maybe they're a little bit nervous and it's a red blotchy piece. So blemishes really kind of mean a whole bunch of different things. That stuff absolutely automatically gets retouched. Nobody wants that in the finished picture. Now, beyond that, things like flyaway hairs. If you got flyaway hairs that are, draping down over the face and that means you as the photographer were sloppy when you were shooting because nobody held a gun to your head and made you take the picture at that moment. You could have fixed that hair. That's also a great incentive to work with a makeup artist. So that kind of stuff also needs to be retouched. So certainly I'd rather get it correct in the camera, but if I miss it, then I'm going to fix it afterwards. That kind of stuff is really pretty much of every single shot that I do, Mitch. Now, beyond there are elements, so you use the phrase shooting perfect. There are elements that you can't always get perfect in camera. Notice I say can't always. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So as an example, let's say you're photographing someone that you get a really nice smile out of them, but there's just a little too much energy in that smile. And as a result of that, the upper lip has gotten really thin. Or as a result of that, one eye, and this is very common, one eye is a little more closed than the other. If overall that's the perfect shot, oh, hell yes, I'm going to fix that in post. Because if it comes down to, well, I was really having a hard time with this person because they were kind of nervous. And so I was really trying to work with them. Along comes this one great shot, but their left eye it's you can tell it's got just a hint of a squint to it. I'm going to open that eye. Hands down, I have no problem doing that. So I hope that helps, Mitch. I never go into a shoot assuming that I'm going to do a lot of Photoshop. I never go into a shoot feeling that it's okay to do a lot of Photoshop. I want to do as much as I can in camera. But now one more piece to this, not to confuse the issue, but to be clear, and this is why I started out kind of with that little vent about people want that kind of simple answer, and there's no simple answer. When I'm shooting, let me think of an example here. When I'm shooting, okay, I'm a stickler about hair. I fuss about hair all the time when I review pictures. In my own pictures, you don't see a lot of messy hair. So let's say I'm shooting and I happen to notice, I'm into the shot and I've done a few frames already and my subject, whether it's a model or just a portrait subject, they're comfortable and things are going really well. And I notice there's like a strand of hair that's coming down on the cheek right here. 9 times out of 10, I will keep shooting, even though I notice there's a strand of hair there that I do not want in my finished shot. And the reason why I'll keep shooting in that example is because if it's like one strand, even if it's, several pieces of hair that it's thick, but as long as it's like a straight line down, that's really easy to retouch. So if I'm sitting there, I've got my subject's in the groove, the shoot's going along, they're happy, things are working really well, I'm not going to stop that flow and fix the hair. But believe me, I'm not going to leave that hair in the picture either. So that's a scenario where while I'm shooting, I'm going to make a decision. And this is the acceptable version of fix it in post. So my whole decision-making process around that, Mitch, really evolves with what is going to be, 1, the most efficient, 2, most efficient without sacrificing quality. And that's how I'm going to make that decision. Hi, Irene. I see Irene's here tonight. How are you? Irene, I need to catch up to you. And I will do that soon, I promise. So next question we had tonight. Kim, what's the best camera settings for surfing? I'm assuming, Kim, you do not mean taking pictures of surfing the web, and you mean people on surfboards. The biggest thing you want to worry about there, Kim, is you want to worry about your shutter speed, first and foremost. Beyond that, you've got a couple of variables that you're going to deal with. So obviously, you got a person surfing, you got fast action, so you want to stop that action. Now, I'm a big fan of shooting manual. In scenarios like that, it can be a little tougher to shoot manual. You can have crazy light going on, depending on where the people are surfing. If they're really big waves and you get a person that kind of gets under a pipe, and if you're able to get a good angle, the light can drop off a stop, 2 stops in that case. So that's actually one of those scenarios where it can be a really, really good idea to go ahead and shoot shutter priority automatic. Definitely shoot on raw, because the problem of it is you're not going to be able to make exposure compensations on the fly. If somebody's surfing along and they happen to wind up, underneath a pipe where it gets dark where they're at, but if you've got a lot of the white edging of that pipe in the frame, you're potentially going to underexpose that shot a little bit. Shoot on raw, you'll be able to make up for it in post and just let the camera do its thing. But your priority is absolutely going to be the shutter speed. And bottom line there is you want to go as fast as you can without sacrificing quality due to really high ISOs. The other variable in that, Kim, is if you're going to shoot surfing, you want a really long lens. So depending on your budget, your scenario is one of, let's say you're using a 300 or a 400 or a 500 millimeter lens, it's probably going to be like an f4 or 5.6, unless you've got a lot of bucks and you can afford a 300 millimeter or a 400 millimeter 2.8 for anywhere from 8 to 10 grand. So that being said, you're not going to have quite as wide an aperture to work at. Doug, thank you very much, sir. Greatly appreciated for that. For those of you that just saw Doug's name pop up in the chat window there with that nice green bar, that's called Super Chat. If you see that little dollar sign down in the bottom there, by no means are you obligated, but I'll give you a little tip. When you make a donation during the show, you have the ability to put a comment in with your Super Chat. And the more money you donate, the more characters you get. Because if you're a YouTube user on a regular basis, you already know that chat window only allows you 200 characters. When you make a donation, it expands the number of characters you get. And I promise you, anything that shows up with that color bar, I will pause and answer that question. Not that I won't answer the rest of your questions. I'm going to try and get as many in as I can, but I will definitely answer the Super Chat questions for sure. So Doug, thank you. So back to your surfing question, Kim. The other variable that's going to come into play, and this is really the last piece of advice I can give you without knowing a little bit more about your specific situation, is are you going to be at an angle where you've got water as a background, or are you going to be at an angle where you've got like horizon and maybe other surfers as a background? Because if you've got horizon and a lot of other surfers as a background, you really want to try and minimize your depth of field. So depending on your lens, depending on the distance you are from the surfers, depending on the maximum aperture of the lens, you're going to want to try and reduce that reduce that aperture as much as possible. If you've got a water background, so maybe you've got a beach, especially if we're talking California here, a lot of times there are, cliffs and kind of hills right near the beaches, so you can get an elevated position. If that's the case and you've got a water background, then you don't really have to worry that much about the depth of field. But it's all going to depend on your lens, your distance. So those are all things to factor in on. Parminda, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys. I really sincerely appreciate the support. So, Kim, I hope that helps out. Even though I'm pretty much a studio guy, believe me, from my days in photojournalism and shooting sports and all that kind of stuff, I promise you that's good sound advice. And believe me, especially if you're in California, hit up some Facebook groups, do a search on Facebook for photographers and surfing, and I'd be shocked if there aren't some Facebook groups out there that are dedicated to people that shoot surfing and that kind of stuff. But it's pretty much like any other sport in the sense that you want to be able to use a lens that's going to get you as close as possible, fast shutter speed to stop the action, limit the depth of field if you've got a busy background, and most importantly, Kim, for any sport that you shoot, the more you understand the sport, the better you're going to be able to anticipate the action and get the shots that you want. If you go into it knowing nothing about it and nothing how it works, you're basically going to be hoping that you get good stuff, and then you're forced to have to react to everything. A good sports photographer knows the sport inside out and backwards and is able to anticipate moments instead of react to them. That's really key for getting really, really great sports shots. Okay? Troy, what is the difference between a beauty dish with a sock versus a softbox other than the name? They both block backlight. Well, okay, yes, they do. So if you were to put the two side by side, and Troy, you can actually see this. Here, let me switch back real quick so that you can see some real examples of this playing out. Let me show you a video that you need to go watch, and you may have watched it before, but since you're thinking about this and you're wondering that point, make sure you go back and watch this video. This one right here, Light Modifiers 101. I have that set up in there in that video where you'll see a model, and then I change the modifiers from a beauty dish to Kim. Thank you so much, Kim. I appreciate it. I changed the modifier from a beauty dish to a softbox to a shoot throw umbrella. So yes, they both stop backlight. If I had to give you a short, concise answer, Troy, I would tell you that generally speaking, a beauty dish is going to give you a little bit of a sharper light. And what I mean is, let's say we're doing a close-up of a person's face. So let's assume, just for the sake of this conversation, that your light source, whether it be the sock of the beauty dish or whether it be the front of the softbox, let's assume that it's about 3 feet from your subject's face. So we're doing a nice, tight, close-up shot. You will find that it will feel like the light from the beauty dish falls off a little bit faster, and you start to get shadow a little quicker. It's not going to be like harsh and horrible. It's just going to be a faster fall off. Generally, a softbox is also going to be, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say generally a softbox is a little bit broader, but that's actually my method. It's a little bit broader because I don't have any softboxes that are smaller than a medium softbox, which is about 24 by 36 inches. I don't particularly like the small softboxes, so my softboxes are a tad larger than my beauty dish, which is a 21-inch beauty dish, okay? So, but all in all, the beauty dish tends to be just a slightly bit harder light, and especially if you take that sock off, Troy, then it's definitely going to be kind of a harder light. But kind of like the comment that I made, kind of the offhanded comment that everybody's called me out on, that I have promised a video, and yes, Jarek, I know you're here, so I'm going to do it. It's just going to be a couple weeks yet. I made a comment in that video when I was doing that camera club talk, the video called Portraits That Flatter, how you could get essentially the same lighting with a shoot-through umbrella as you can with a beauty dish. So I will prove that to you guys. My point behind that is that people tend to get a little too hung up on the modifiers. And this is why equipment manufacturers won't sponsor me. I'm not dissing any equipment manufacturers. I'm just pointing out the simple math here, gang. These companies, in order to stay in business, they've got to sell product. If they don't keep innovating and coming up with stuff with new names and new gimmicks to it, then they're not going to sell product because people have already got the first product. Why do they need a second one, right? So they've got to give them a reason to buy a new one. So what we wind up with is we wind up with all these crazy modifiers that at the end of the day, the differences between them are extremely subtle and really sometimes almost non-existent. But this new one looks really cool because of the way it's built and the colors and the name and, all that stuff. So, and especially Troy, I know you're a regular. I know where you're at with lighting. I would tell you right out of the box, man, and I know you know what I'm going to say because you've heard me say it to you many times. Stop sweating it. Keep it simple, stupid. Tony G, thank you, sir. I really, really appreciate it. I'll get your question. I promise you. It's sitting here in front of me. I'll get to it. So, Troy, really, my advice to you, because I know you don't have a beauty dish, don't worry about it. Work with a softbox. I will tell you this. If you want your softbox to look a little bit more like a beauty dish, get it closer to your subject. That's all you got to do. Get it closer to your subject. That way you're using the inverse square law. You're going to get that light to fall off faster. It's going to give you a very, very similar effect. That would be my advice. So, Tony, again, thank you so much. So your question here, it's about metering with the half button press for focus. How do you meter, say, a background and focus on the foreground? Well, it's okay. So, Tony, here's the thing. So give me a quick answer here, Tony. Are you asking me specifically with regards to outdoor shooting or studio shooting or both? So let me do another question. Give me an answer, and when I get that answer, I'll come back to your question and I'll answer it because that's gonna change my answer a little bit. Okay. So let's see, where are we at here? Richard, for what kind of, whoops, it just bounced away. For what kind of photographer does digital medium format make sense? Have you used it? Would you consider using it? Well, okay, so Richard, I'll tell you what we're going to do here. And now that I read that question, I know Michael Bradley's here, so Michael, don't type yet. Let me finish what I'm going to say. And then, Michael, I want you to give a response to this, okay? There's a guy here in the group. He's from LA, Michael Bradley. He's a member of my Facebook group. So, Richard, I know you're also a member of the Facebook group. So it's a great way that you could kind of connect with him and ask him more questions. But let me give you my response, and then by all means, I'll let Michael weigh in because I know he shoots medium format digital. For me, medium format digital makes no sense. Now, I want to be clear. If you go look at Michael's work, which is very good work, you're going to see that he does a lot of stuff very similar to what I do. But I happen to know from previous posts that he's made in my group and from some messaging that I've done with him that he has some very specific reasons why he uses it. But, you know, the kind of the standard marketing fare that you will get about medium format is because you're working with the larger sensors, because you've got more pixels, you're going to get more dynamic range out of the image, et cetera, et cetera. Keep in mind that I use a Nikon D810. So, you know, we're talking 30 plus megapixels in that D810. You can go online and you can find article after article after article where people have made the comparisons of the Nikon D810 to the medium format people. And, you know, that's part of the process, okay? Meaning that, you know, for me, the D810 is more than enough. It's more than ample. Beyond that, you know, there's certainly some benefits with lenses, et cetera. But I'm going to let Michael weigh in on that question here in the chat and kind of give you his answer. So, Michael, there's like a 3-minute window on the chat post. So think your answer through and make it nice and long, and you can weigh in on why you would use it. Okay? All right, so back to Tony's question here. I think I saw it. Tony, did I see your answer go by? I did. So you have no idea shooting in general. My focusing sucks, and I don't really know how to use the meter and focus any setting. Okay, cool. So let's go back to Tony's question. And now that I have the context, I can answer it. So Tony's question was, with regards to metering with a half button press for focus, how do you meter, say, a background and focus on the foreground? So first of all, I would not use automatic. That sounds to me, the way you're describing that, Tony, and if I'm wrong, update me here. It sounds to me like you're using automatic for that. Because to be honest with you, like, I'm not sure why you would meter for the background and focus on the foreground, because I would assume that since you're focusing on the foreground, that's where your subject is. But I will say that, so I'm going to make a big leap in an assumption here, Tony. I have a feeling, since you're asking me this question, part of the problem is you're not moving your focus spot out of the center of the frame. If that's the case, that's why you suck at focusing. Plain and simple. Move the focus spot to where you want the focal point to be, period. And when you first do it, especially for you guys that might be new at this, and this leads into the whole back button focus argument, which I'm not going to have that debate tonight, but I promise you, when you first do that throttling of the focus spot and moving it around, it's awkward as crap. It feels sluggish. You feel like you're missing shots. It's just bizarre. You got to practice. You got to practice. I literally have no problem doing that. When I'm shooting, I'm moving that focus spot all over the place. I mean, most cameras, even Canon, even though I'm not a big fan of Canon and their ergonomics, when you hold that camera and you've got your finger on the shutter release button, your thumb is perfectly situated to hit that little knob that's going to move the focus spot around. And that's why it's there, so that you can move that focus spot. Don't leave it in the center, because the other byproduct of leaving your focus spot in the center all the time is you tend to get sloppy with composition. Now, the people that like back button focus will argue, no, that's why I do back button focus. So please, you don't have to type that. I'm making the point that if you are a beginner and if you're new, if you try to use back button focus too early, it removes the pressure for you to really take the time and compose your shots properly. So believe me, just learn how to move that focus spot around. And I think you're going to find that that's going to solve your problem. Tony, if I'm not really getting, because I mean, sincerely, if you're having a hard time focusing, that's a problem that we need to solve. So I know you're a member of my group. If I'm not really getting to the gist of your question there, please promise me you bring that question back up in the group, and let's have more of an ongoing conversation so that I can kind of really help you with that, because I want to make sure where it is you're really struggling with the process. Brent, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you. So let's move on here. Road, what type of advice do you have for getting new clients aside from using the internet and social media? It wasn't that long ago. I was driving down the road and came up an intersection, and there was a guy standing there that looked kind of homeless, and he had a sign. It's like, we'll shoot for, lunch. Okay. Honestly, in today's world, Road, in terms of finding clients, the only thing you've kind of left out here, you're talking about using the internet, you're talking about using social media. There's kind of an old school piece of business and marketing, and that's the networking element. Now, I want to be clear, because for me, in today's world, and I'm directing this mostly to younger photographers, networking is a word that I think should be banned from like every college student in America. Because every kid that I meet coming out of college, when they talk about networking, they're all excited about networking because, you get to go socialize and you get drinks and you get free food and everybody hangs out and talks. And they think that they're going to build a business that way. And the problem is the people that they want to talk to, if they go to these events, they simply just want to get some food and have a couple drinks. They don't want to do business. So the challenge with the networking, so as a good example on Road, I don't know what kind of photography you're doing. So I'm going to make an assumption. Let's say you're doing portraits. I spoke with a new photographer just yesterday on a similar topic. Let's say you're doing portraits. One of the first things that you should do is you should go, because the idea of corporate portraits is where the money's at these days. Doing portraits for social media profiles, doing portraits for small businesses, doing portraits for corporations. You should go to the local Chamber of Commerce. Offer to do a half-hour presentation for them. Local Chamber of Commerce, Kiwanis clubs, Rotary clubs, all that kind of stuff. And even in different countries, there are similar service organizations. Offer to do a 30-minute presentation for them about the importance of having a good business headshot. They'll generally give you a free meal when you go. And basically what they're doing is they're inviting you to come in and advertise your services to their members. And believe me, I used to do that back in the 1980s, and it works, and it still works. Those organizations are still around. It still exists. So the thing that you have to remember, and this really applies to almost any kind of business as far as photography goes, not just portraits. At the end of the day, the work that we want to do, it has to happen between two people, because I don't think there's that many people in my group here that are trying to make money shooting landscapes. We're people photographers. That's what we're here talking about. Okay, portraits and events. So perfect, Road. So I'm right on the money then. Even same with events. When you go to like the Chamber of Commerce, you go to the Rotary clubs, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if you're in the U.S., Road, but if you're not, pretty much any country has similar types of service organizations and similar types of business groups. These are the places you want to make contact with. But you have to understand, they're not just going to welcome you to come say, hey, I'm here, hire me. You have to give them something. And you don't have to be the greatest public speaker in the world, but you should already have a portfolio of portraits and headshots and some event photography. So even on the event side, you could go to an organization and you could talk to them about the importance and the value of having great pictures of their events for marketing. Road, I believe you're a member of my Facebook group. If you're not, you better sign up for that. But go back to the Facebook group, scroll down through the wall. There are two posts. One is about a month old. One's about 2 weeks old. They are posts that I put up talking about podcast interviews that I did for a website called wellattended.com. The first one has to do with event photography, and it talks a little bit about the importance of it. So it doesn't talk about how to market yourself as a photographer, but you have my permission. Now, you can't claim it as your own. You got to use your own words, but take that information. And that's the information that you would present to people that says, this is why you need great photography of your event. And then the second, the more recent one, is about headshots and why you need a good headshot and how to get a good headshot. It's a 30-minute podcast. If you take the information in there, put it into your own words, put your pictures with it, you're welcome. I just gave you the presentation to walk into these service groups with, to explain to them why it's so important to be able to make sure that you have great pictures to market yourself. So that's where I would start. But and that's basically taking a step backwards. I'm all about technology. I love the internet. I love social media. But our business happens between people. And the mistake that so many new/young photographers make is they forget that. And they just sit in front of a computer and they think that they're going to make a business happen. And that doesn't happen. Hello, Jaleel King. Is Jaleel in here? Hey, Jaleel's here too, man. Wow, I've got Jaleel in here. I've got Irene in here. Jaleel, I owe you a phone call, man. It's two of you. I owe a phone call, but we are going to do some stuff soon. I promise. For you, Jaleel, I want to come down to Philly and I want to do a shoot with you. But I don't know about you, man. I don't shoot when it's cold outside, and especially not right now with all that snow. So as soon as the snow's gone and the weather warms up, you and I are going out, and I want to do a video really about you and your style of shooting and what I want to know from you, Jaleel. So, because this is what I do in my YouTube channel. It's not all the razzle-dazzle stuff. I know you can razzle-dazzle. I want to get you to talk to my subscribers about the hows and the whys behind what you do. So obviously you've got some really interesting hows. And as far as the whys go, that's the stuff that we really try to get to. It's to make people think. And in your particular case, Jaleel, especially, you do a lot of problem solving to do your photography. And that's something I'm really big about. So now you know, so you can start thinking about it. But that's what I want to come down and talk to you about, Jaleel. Okay? So Joe Serta asked me, Lightroom or Photoshop? Joe, it depends on what you need. So I'm a Photoshop guy. I hate Lightroom. That doesn't mean that you should automatically go get Photoshop. So let me give you the kind of the simple explanation, and then I would encourage you to do a little bit more research. The reason I don't use Lightroom is because, number one, I was using Photoshop and Bridge to do my basic culling of images. I was using that long before Lightroom came along. And so I didn't want to change my workflow. And Lightroom didn't present me enough of a reason to change my workflow. Lightroom is a program that Adobe developed specifically for photographers. Believe it or not, Photoshop was not meant for photographers. It was meant for designers. And photographers adopted it, and it just kind of took off. And it became this out-of-control monster. And that's when Adobe went back to the drawing board and they came up with Lightroom. My huge beef with Lightroom is the cataloging, the fact that I have to import files. If I could use Lightroom to simply open up files and work on them and close it, boom, I'd be using Lightroom in a heartbeat. But for that reason, I won't. I had a filing system that works. It grows exponentially very easily. I can find any image I've taken in the last 17 years in less than 3 minutes. Super simple. So I didn't need Lightroom. I will tell you straight up that for people that shoot primarily portraits or weddings or event work, Lightroom's the bomb. I mean, that's what it's designed for. It really, really is. So the good part of it is you can do trial versions. Oh, Mitch, thank you very much. Mitch, I'll get your question next. You can do trial versions of both programs. And if you do the photography Creative Cloud, you get both of the programs together anyway. So if you're just starting out, I would encourage you to try them both. I will tell you that the developing portion of both Lightroom and Photoshop, so in Lightroom, it's called the Develop panel. In Photoshop, it's the Camera Raw plugin. It's the same piece of software. Even though it looks a little different in Lightroom compared to Camera Raw, it's the exact same piece of software. There's one piece of software on your computer that runs both of those. So in terms of the real engine behind those two programs, it's the same. You will need to use Photoshop when you get into photo retouching. If you want to start doing the blemish work, you can do some of that in Lightroom, but I'm sorry, it's clunky. If you're going to get into the really high-end stuff where you want to start doing frequency separation, which is all the rage, or if you need to use Liquify, or you want to use any of the face-aware Liquify tools, then you're definitely going to Photoshop. That's it. Lightroom's not going to handle any of that stuff. Okay? So Mitch has a question here. Semi-retired, love photography, learning a ton, and I'm beginning to do it as a business. I'd love to find a great mentor. Thoughts on how to find a great mentor locally? Well, Mitch, since you're semi-retired, that puts you kind of like in my ballpark, maybe a couple years ahead of me. Let me tell you a story that about something that happened with me. I'll make it really short, but it's a true story, and it taught me the lesson really, really well. When I was a kid, not long after I got my first camera, about a quarter of a mile from where I lived, there was a small photography studio. It was literally in an old house. And my father and I, once or twice a week, we would walk about 2 miles to a Friendly's ice cream, because Friendly's was like brand new in town. So we would, in the evenings, in the summertime, we would take a walk to Friendly's and we'd get an ice cream cone. Every freaking time we walked past this photo studio, my dad would start harping on me. It's like, you need to walk in and you need to tell him you'll sweep the floors, but ask him if you can hang out and learn just by hanging out. Just go ask. It's the best way to do it. I didn't have the guts to do it. Every freaking time we go for ice cream, he would harp at me about this. Finally, one night, towards the end of the summer, we're walking past this place and the front door was open and my dad's like, all right, that's it. Come on, we're going in. So at this point, I was like, oh, cool, he's coming with me. So I head down the sidewalk. My dad's right behind me. Get to the door, step in the door, and the next thing I know, I hear the door slam behind me. And I turn around to look, my dad's not there. And the guy behind the counter, he's a young guy who was in his probably like mid to late 20s. He's laughing because, of course, he saw what happened. I didn't. And he's like, can I help you? So at that point, I'm like, what am I going to do? So I was like, hey, I'm into photography. Can I help out? And so the moral is I wound up hanging out there all the time. On Saturdays, I was their lighting monkey for weddings. I was the guy that carried all the lights around, and I'd stand and I'd hold a strobe off in the corner of the room. And we're talking the old Honeywell potato mashers with the optical strobes, so they had to have a clean line of sight to the other flash. And my pay, and man, it was the best pay ever. My pay was a cheesesteak from the best cheesesteak place in town. Loved it. So the moral is, Mitch, the way you find one, go ask. Like, honestly, you just go ask. Find a photographer local to you that's doing the kind of work that you do, obviously, because, you don't want to find somebody that's doing completely different work. And you want to go and ask them. And, I wowould say to you, bottom line, one of the things that I always teach young kids, college kids in that, when they're kind of looking for that kind of help is, and Mitch, you're a little bit older than a college kid, so I think you're smart enough to understand this. But I always teach the young kids, like, look, don't just call somebody and say, hey, could you mentor me? Could I, hang out while you're shooting? Because believe me, I get those requests all the time, and it drives me nuts. And I take the time, even though they usually don't like it, and I school them. It's like, look, you ask me a question like that, you are wasting my time. And really, honestly, in the big scheme of things, you're disrespecting me. If you're going to ask me for something like that, when you ask, number one, this is old school, but number one, kiss my ass just a little bit. Meaning, tell me that you've looked at my work. Tell me something about my photography. And when I say kiss my ass, I don't mean tell me I'm the greatest thing ever. No, but prove to me that I didn't just show up on a Google search so you decided to ask. Say something to me about my photography. Talk about one of my pictures. Show me that you actually took a few minutes to look at my work and understand what I'm doing. And that's why you're interested. Not just, oh yeah, you're a photographer and I want to be a photographer, so can I hang out with you? So that kind of thing. But honestly, Mitch, do a Google search, photographers in your area for whatever type of work it is, and ask them. That's where I would start. I do offer consultations, and I do offer one-on-one workshops. So if you want to make a trip to Pennsylvania, or the consultations I do via Skype, you can do a 1-hour consultation with me. The link is on my website. There's a page called Learn from Joe. You can check that information out. But I would definitely, just simply ask somebody. The worst they can do is say no. That's the moral to the story. Okay? So let's see who I got here. Alex, if someone asks you to photograph them and you ask them for a price, but you're new to photo shoots, if someone asks you to photograph them and they ask you for a price, but you're new to photo shoots and pricing, what do you charge? Does it vary from photographer to photographer? Alex, we need at least 3 hours, and I've got less than, half an hour here. Let me give you the short version, Alex. You should tune into some of my Thursday night talk chats because I talk a little bit more about that stuff on Thursday nights. I will tell you that you can do some real simple Google searching to get some guidelines on pricing. It sounds to me, Alex, so I'm going to make some assumptions here. So by all means, if I'm wrong, tune into a talk chat on Thursdays when we talk about this stuff, or make sure you join my Facebook group. The link's in the description below, and it's already gone through in the chat window here. and I will gladly be able to give you some more information. But it sounds to me like you're really like a beginner, okay? Like really. In which case, my honest advice to you, so this is the old school advice, if you're really a beginner and you're really just learning and somebody asks you to photograph them and they ask you for a price, you look them back and say, you know what? I'd love to do it. Pay me what you can afford. Done. And go do it, man, because it sounds to me like you need some experience. Now, if I'm wrong and you're sitting with a really sweet portfolio, but you're at that point where you're, ready to start making money, then okay, then we need to get into pricing. And the pricing is going to vary from photographer to photographer. Certainly somebody with much more experience, with a much better portfolio, et cetera, they're going to be able to charge more. Because anytime, when we talk about pricing in general, it doesn't matter what you're selling. It has to do with perceived value. So the thing that all photographers struggle with today is that the perceived value of photography is really low. Why? Because people can take amazing pictures with these things. Because you really can. So people look at it and say, well, what's so hard about being a photographer? Why should I pay you all that money? It's the perceived value. It's the same as, there's no way in the world you would pay the same amount of money for a Honda that you'd be willing to pay for a Jaguar. Okay? Like you just wouldn't, because the perceived value is not there. So yes, it's going to vary from photographer to photographer. But at this stage of the game, if you're as new as I think you are, work for free or work for little. And you're honestly better off saying to people, pay me what you can afford to pay me and go do the job and bust your butt, man. If it's a situation where you're going to have actual cash outlay, like, I don't know, maybe you need to buy a certain set of props or you need to buy something to do the shoot, by all means, tell them, okay, well, listen, I don't have that color background, but I can get one. They cost $40. So you pay the $40, I'll get the background. By all means, do that. But I wouldn't get too deep into it until you're really ready. I mean, certainly it'd be nice to make money, but I'm old school. And that means just because the person's offering to pay doesn't mean you should charge them. So you got to be honest with yourself about what you're able to deliver, okay? Let's see. Kent, after shooting a portrait, do you edit down to absolutely zero flyaway hairs? Absolutely zero is a really kind of definitive, mandatory thing. If you look at my work, Kent, you see very few flyaway hairs. Every now and then you'll see a couple small ones that are kind of natural, but to me, they're a distraction. So I hate to use the word never. In my life, I've learned that when I say never, it usually comes back to bite me in the ass. So I avoid that never word. But most of the time for me, I'm going to get rid of all the flyaways. Especially, so I will tell you this. I'm almost 100% guaranteed that I'm going to get rid of flyaways that are around the face. Flyaways on the outside, I may be a little bit more forgiving with, as long as they're not a distraction. That's kind of the key piece for me, okay? Cody LaFata, hey, Joe, what's your take on used lenses? Because of how well good lenses hold their value, I worry the discount is not enough to take the chance of getting something that may have issues. I mean, Cody, at the end of the day, the first thing that is going to help you make that decision is really your budget ability. When I was 16 years old, I was very, very fortunate because I had been literally cutting grass and shoveling snow and doing all that kind of stuff. I was very fortunate. I had like an amazing Nikon kit. I had a Nikon F with a motor drive, which they were crazy expensive. I had an awesome set of lenses. They were all used. Ironically, my father knew a man who worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and he was just about to retire. And he had no intention of continuing shooting when he retired. I mean, he had done it all his life. He was done. And so he was selling his whole kit. So I got it really, really inexpensively. The stuff was beat the crap in terms of the way it looked, nicked, scraped, because these were newspaper photographers' gear. But it worked great. And in part because back then, especially Nikon, that's why Nikon was the camera back then. Canon was just getting themselves going. The Nikon stuff, it was durable. It was built like a brick. So I would say to you that the things you want to consider when you're buying used, as far as lenses in particular, consider where you're buying them. If you're going to go like on Craigslist or something, or even on eBay, you've got to be careful. I would encourage you, if you're going to buy a used lens on eBay, make sure that the person you're buying from allows returns. because when somebody does an auction on eBay or a sale on eBay, they have the ability to say no returns. So if you're buying a used lens and it seems like a really good price and there's no returns, I'm concerned about doing that. If I'm buying a used lens from B&H or Adorama, they've got a good return policy. So by all means, buy it, check it out, and as long as you don't mind going through the headache of having to ship it back to get the return, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. So, that's the kind of stuff you have to look at. It's just kind of protect yourself in that sense. Okay. Let's see. Chris Dye, how about shooting outside on a windy day and the hair? Hats. Shoot with the subject looking into the wind. I mean, if it's really, really windy, it's going to look like crap. So you just don't. If it's one of those situations where this is a scheduled gig and like you have no choice, the client's in from out of town and you've got to get the shoot done, then it's all about problem solving. If it's too windy to shoot normally, even with the subject looking into the wind, then you've got to find a spot where you can cut down the wind. Maybe you're going to shoot from like behind a building. And believe me, I've been through all these scenarios. You find a building that's big enough where it's going to knock the wind down, where you can maybe get under an overhang or something like that. If you have the ability to have someone assist you, if you can take out a big flat with you, which you've got to be really careful on a windy day because those things, you got to really hang on to them. They become sails. But that's an option for being able to try and knock the wind down. But honestly, Chris, without trying to be funny, the easiest solution is don't do it. That's really the easiest solution. But if it's one of those deals where you have no choice, you start out, try working with your subject facing into the wind. If the lighting doesn't permit it, if the wind's too much, then you've got to find a spot where you can block the wind and go from there, because unfortunately it's a nightmare. The other thing that will help on those are days when you will really appreciate having a makeup artist along, and you're going to use a ton of hairspray to try and knock that down as much as possible. Okay? All right. Let's see. Camille Tyler, can I give some tips on what to tell guys what to do with their hands when photographing them? Not giving them direction is not working for me, but I'm not sure what to say. So, Camille, it's interesting that you asked that, in the sense that one of the things that I've learned over the years, and it's a psychological thing. The more you talk about hands with your subject, the worse the hands get. Even if you know what to tell them, the more you talk about the hands, the worse the hands get. If you're working with a really, really experienced model that's good with hands, then yeah, it doesn't matter. You tell them something about hands and they'll do something, really, really interesting, and that's cool. But if you're working with someone who's not a model, or they're just a beginner, or if it's for a portrait type thing, literally just a mention of hands can make somebody hyper aware of it to the point that that's where all the nerves and the tension go. So what I try to do, especially with a guy, I try to do things where they can kind of hang their hands, like, the hand kind of draping over the knee, that type of stuff. Or if I want something, maybe it's a little bit more casual and I don't want to have to play with the hands, maybe I'll tuck the hands in the pockets. But when you do that, see how my shoulders went up? You got to make sure they relax their shoulders afterwards. The other thing that works really well, depending on the context of your pictures, Camille, like, I don't know if we're talking about modeling shots or if you're talking about a portrait. If you're talking about modeling shots, give them a prop. Giving them a prop to hold solves the what do I do with my hands problem. That's one of the easiest ways out of that, big time. If it's a portrait, then yeah, giving them a prop kind of doesn't work. But with guys especially, keep it as unposed as possible. So what I will say to you, Camille, if you are a member of my Facebook group, continue this discussion in the Facebook group, but give me some examples. And literally, so, do a post talking about it, add a couple images in. You have my permission. I'll tell the moderators. You don't have to give me all the details about your camera settings and that. But do me a favor. When you post the picture, use Photoshop before you post it. And if you're going to post 2 or 3 shots, put them all together in one JPEG so that you post it as one JPEG. And then let's talk about some of the actual scenarios that you're dealing with. It's going to be a lot easier to help you then. But absolutely, with guys, keep it simple. Anytime you can hang the hands or hide it completely, it's going to be a whole lot easier. Because even if you do the pose like with a guy, leaning forward in that with his forearm on the leg, then the hands just draped and relaxed. It's the simplest way to go as far as that's concerned. Okay. Martine Hearn, in your opinion, what equipment or settings do you use to capture the moon? Okay, from the people guy. So interestingly enough, I got into a major argument about 2 years ago with two of my wife's colleagues. My wife is a college professor. These guys were physics professors. And there was some big full moon coming up, and these guys were going on about all this science for how you figure out the right exposure and this and that for shooting the moon. And I was like, man, you guys are making it really, really hard. And they're like, what do you mean? And if you've ever met a physics professor, they don't like being wrong. Physics professors take pride in how much crap they know, okay? So I told these guys, look, all you got to do, it's real simple. Use your ISO as your shutter speed and shoot at f11, and you're good to go. And these guys looked at me like I had three heads and then laughed at like, you're nuts. That can't work. There's no way that'll work. Can't do it. I'm like, you guys are full of shit. Like, I'll go out and do it tonight because there was like some full moon or something going on. So I went out and did it just with a simple 200 millimeter lens. And even though they were reading the EXIF data on the files, because I sent them the files, they came up with all these excuses why I must have done something else that I wasn't sharing with them. I learned this trick when I was a teenager. Use your ISO as your shutter speed. F11, use a telephoto lens of at least 200 millimeters, and you can shoot the moon. I mean, if you want to, get super, super close, you need a 300, 400, 500 millimeter lens, or you cheat like hell and you shoot with an APS-C. So that makes your lens 1.5 times the effective focal length. That'll help. Or even better yet, go with a micro four thirds, and that's going to double your focal length of your lens. But basically, that's it. Now, if you want to get into like astrophotography now, where you're going to track it and do all that kind of stuff, then you need some specialized equipment, and I am definitely not your expert to talk to there. But I promise you that little equation that I gave you can work. And the reason it works, that's essentially the equation that you would use for shooting an object in a bright sunny afternoon minus 1 f-stop. Okay? That's literally all it is, because the moon is lit by direct light from the sun. So by opening up that one extra stop to f11, you're allowing for a little bit of atmospheric crap, and you're good to go. It works. It really, really works. Okay? So, Duckway, cool. Should I get used lenses or a used body? Well, okay, going back to kind of Cody's answer there, there's nothing wrong with used. Just be smart when you buy the used. Make sure you have the ability to return it, and or make sure that you trust the source that it's coming from. So there's no problem with using eBay. Again, I would avoid using Craigslist unless you're buying from somebody local where you can go and meet them and see it and all that kind of stuff. But eBay is fine as long as they allow returns. Don't buy when you can't return it. And then, of course, like places like Adorama or B&H, or even if you have local camera stores, everybody always thinks of Adorama and B&H, but there's nothing wrong with the smaller camera stores, especially with used gear. Do understand, of course, that for the smaller camera stores, if they're selling used equipment, they are making a markup on them. Okay, so that's a big piece of it. Ooh, Sven, thank you so much. I missed that. See, I got to scroll down more. I'm missing some of your posts. I hope I didn't miss anybody else's super chat here. Okay, there's Mitch's. So Sven, let me get yours real quick here. Best color background for Light Blaster. Most of the shots that I've done, Sven, with a Light Blaster, I've done with a black background. Also, the gray works really, really well, but keep in mind, if I'm using the gray, I'm also not lighting it. So if I was just going to do the shot without the Light Blaster, that gray would be a really dark gray. But I found that by using the black and then essentially overexposing it by throwing the Light Blaster on it, that's what gives me the best scenario. And Sven, I know you're a part of my Facebook group and all that stuff too. So, and you've asked me about some Light Blaster stuff before, because I think you got your Light Blaster like right after I did that video on the Light Blasters. So if you're still running into some issues with it, what I want you to do is the next time you use it, take me a behind the scenes shot that shows me the perspective of where your Light Blaster is, where your background is, and where your subject is. I don't really care about the camera that's shooting, but your subject, Light Blaster, and background. And do a post in the group and give me the settings that you're using. In other words, the power settings on your strobe, the distance from the backdrop, all that kind of stuff. And let's troubleshoot it. Because if you're still struggling with it, that's way too long. We got to get you set up so that you can actually use that. That Light Blaster, those are really fun to work with. And I would encourage you, once you get it nailed down that it's working well for you, go ahead and get some slides made. It's like your own slides. The Light Blaster die cuts that they have and the slides they have, they're good. They're really good. In fact, I particularly like their die cuts, the metal ones. And keep in mind, both both of the guys that are involved with Light Blast are actually members of the group, the Facebook group, so they'll probably wind up hearing me say this. I love the Light Blaster. I love their die cuts. Their slides, they're okay. I would encourage you, go out and make your own slides, and you can make them from like Photoshop, pretty much anything. You can create designs, create patterns. You can use other photos that you've taken. I actually took some of my 35 millimeter slides that I shot like 20 years ago, and I turned them into slides for the Light Blaster and have been having a whole lot of fun with it. Okay? All right. So let's see here. We got, all right, good, Sven. So I will look forward to that update when you can post that. Okay? All right. Going down here. From Marcos, do I think it's important to a photographer to exhibit his work in a gallery regularly? Marcos, full disclosure, I have never done a gallery exhibit in my entire life. When I was younger, it was a combination of, when I was younger, my excuse was, who would want to look at newspaper photography in a gallery? That was my excuse. The reality was, I was too scared. Now that I am older and I have work actually that I think would be fun, to do it, and I'll tell you actually about how I want to do my first gallery exhibit. It's still in the dream phase. I want to do it, but I've still never done it. Now my problem is, and my excuse is, I just don't have time. But I will tell you what I want to do. So at the college where I teach, the one course that I teach where my wife is a professor, they have a permanent art gallery that is essentially this huge white room. Very tall, really big room. And then they have like portable walls. So depending on the exhibit they have, they'll set up various walls and that. I want to do an exhibit in there of my fine art nude work, but I want to do it without any of the portable walls. So it's just the big, massive room with the white walls. And essentially what I want to construct in the middle of the room is, for lack of a better phrase, like a teepee that holds one or several computers. I haven't figured out the exact technology, but has multiple projectors. I'm talking 15 to 20 digital projectors aimed all around the room. So that if you attend the exhibit, as you walk into the room, the images are on the wall, but they're not hanging on the wall. They're projected on the wall, and they're all around you. So you're kind of immersed in them. And they will move and change randomly throughout the exhibit. So that's my dream for a gallery exhibit. But I would say to you, Marcos, it really depends on the kind of work you want to do and how you want your career to progress. I mean, if you're looking to simply be a portrait photographer, and I don't mean that like, portrait photographers are nothing. No. I just mean, I don't know that that's something where there's going to be a tremendous amount of business value to doing that. So it's something that you would do kind of for the art's sake and for the fun of it. And there's nothing wrong with doing stuff for fun. But if you're looking to be like a landscape photographer and you want to try and make money, or if you're looking to do like art and abstract type photography, and you want to try and make money, then gallery exhibits are kind of a very important part of how you're going to market yourself and sell your imagery. So in that case, I would say absolutely, you definitely want to consider doing gallery work. So Roberto Cordero, do you prefer to shoot starting off with a black screen regarding studio settings or not? What are the pros and cons? Roberto, do you mean shoot on a black background? If that's what your question is, I don't actually use black backgrounds that much. I tend to use a lot of white. And it's ironic because if you would have met me 20 years ago as a photographer, I would have told you, God, I hate white. I'm so tired of it. It's boring. I love white now because that way there's no distractions and I'm able to really, really focus on my subject. So, and that doesn't mean I only shoot on white, but I shoot much more white than I shoot black at this point. And if I've completely missed the point of your question, let me know. But what I don't have is I don't have one or the other that I always start with. Like I don't always start with white. I don't always start with gray. I don't always start with black. It really depends on what kind of shot I'm after and what I'm trying to do. Again, that's one of those things you don't want to get into a habit where this is how you always do something because that means all your pictures are going to look the same and then they become really boring. Okay. So let's see. Gene, I shoot primarily landscapes and some wildlife. I don't hear much about anti-aliasing filters anymore. In your opinion, how much of a difference does it make, if any? Gene, I can't speak from any experience in that. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I've never used the Nikons that don't have them. So I understand what you read essentially in the textbook aspect of it. I personally never saw the value of spending the extra money to have them removed. Now, indeed, I know that some cameras now come without them and they're not charging more money because of it. But, for me, I would really, I don't want to mislead you at all because that's definitely not in my wheelhouse. So I will be honest about that. And I won't tackle that one. So Roberto's telling me know the settings. Do I prefer starting off with a black screen regarding studio setting or not? Roberto, I'm not sure what you mean by the black screen for the studio settings. Do you mean in terms of how I meter? If I'm metering in the studio, I use a light meter and I use it on an incident setting, which means if this is the subject, I'm going to take the meter to my subject and turn it around and face it towards the lights. And that's how I'm metering. So there's the background doesn't really have any impact on that. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I got that one. Sorry, guys. Scrolling down here. Jarek, I am planning a video that explains how I do my cataloging. Jarek asked me if I could tell us how you do the cataloging. That'll take me way too much time, and we're already going to go over for a few minutes, and I don't mind going over, but I will do a video on that. I already owe you that Umbrella Beauty Dish video, Jarek, so one at a time, but I'll get there, I promise, okay? Let's see. Brent is asking, Joe, I'm a long-time listener, first-time poster. What about Capture One over Lightroom? So I can make that one really easy for right now, Brent. Stay tuned for my video that's coming out this weekend. It's part 2 of the series about tethering, and I'm going to talk all about Capture One and Lightroom and a couple of other pieces of software, but the bulk of that video is going to be about Capture One and Lightroom. I will tell you the short answer is 100% Capture One if you're going to tether often. If you are just doing it occasionally, then Lightroom is fine. And even if you're not tethering, if you're shooting people in a studio especially, Capture One's raw generator is far superior to anything that you will get out of Lightroom. Far superior. Here's the downside. It's expensive. It has a heck of a learning curve. So be forewarned. You're going to have to put some effort into it. It's not one of those things where, oh yeah, I'm really good at Photoshop. You're just going to pick up Capture One and whoo, it's a breeze. You're going to be learning a lot of stuff all over again, and you're going to be learning a lot of stuff in much more depth than you had to learn it in Photoshop. But definitely worth it if you really want to up your game. Okay, so let's see. What do we got next here? Parminder, can you compare Photoshop versus GIMP? I don't use GIMP at all, but I will tell you this. For the most important features that photographers use, GIMP actually does most of the stuff. Now, GIMP doesn't have a lot of the new features like, face-aware liquify and content-aware scale and that kind of stuff. But the real downside to GIMP is everybody that I know that's used GIMP complains about the user interface. In other words, it's not quite as intuitive as what Photoshop does. But I will say sincerely, if you're a new or young photographer and you're working on a budget, heck yeah, go with GIMP. Nothing wrong with that at all. The techniques that you're going to learn in GIMP will transfer when you move to Photoshop, when you get to the point where you can afford that. So, Bren, thank you very much. So, Bren's got a question here. When photographing kids 8 to 10 years old, what's the best thing to do with their hands other than duct taping them? Well, I was going to go for something similar to duct taping, Bren, but again, with kids that are that old, if you can give them something to do with their hands, I don't care how old your subject is. The easiest thing to do always is give people something to actually do. So if you as a photographer are feeling like you are just lacking in your ability to do good hands. Now, I will say there's a video on my YouTube channel that's not going to help you with the 8 to 10-year-olds, but for all of you that are dealing with hands, this one right here, it's one of my older videos. It's like 5 years old, so I'll forewarn you, it's the serious Joe, okay? The good part of it is you don't see me in the video, so it's actually the fat Joe too, but you don't see that. So it's the serious Joe. But I would encourage you, watch that video only in the sense that it will help you with kind of a lot of the philosophy behind what you want to do with hands. But step one, Bren, would be give them something to do, whether it's a prop or have them actually doing something. Step 2, if that doesn't work, honestly, I would try and, if you're shooting a portrait, I try and leave the hands out of the equation. So if you're not shooting a portrait, like let's say, for instance, it's a family portrait, and so you can see all of the kid in the picture, try doing something where they're either sitting on something where they have to lean on something, or maybe they're on the floor and they have to lean, because right away that takes up one hand because the one hand's leaning. So now you're down to the second hand, and the second hand, try and get them to do something that's natural with it. The big challenge with 8 to 10-year-olds is they're so hyper. That way, if you've got them leaning, the one hand's stuck. They can't move it or they fall. So that at least takes one hand out of the equation. Now you're just dealing with one other hand that you've got to try and kind of control. But really the key with hands all the time, I promise you, is simplify. There are books out there about posing hands, same as there are books out there about posing in general. I get myself in trouble for this all the time, but I stand by it. Most of the books on posing, whether it's body parts or whether it's full bodies, they suck. And the reason they suck is because they're very mandatory. The idea is, yes, do this with the person and they look great. And the person that's in the book, in the picture, or the person that's in the video in the picture is like 5'10" and a size 0 or a size 2. So you can do like amazing things with them. But then if you get like a real human being, they don't fit that configuration at all. So all that stuff that you just learned doesn't work. It's like if you learn about C curves and S curves with posing, they're great for thin people and average build people. Here in the United States, unfortunately, we're a very fat country. We are an overweight, unhealthy country. The average dress size in the United States that's sold at retail, this is not Joe making this up, this is facts you can find online. And it's online, so it must be real, right? Donald Trump says so. We're talking a size 14 in the United States. So these are not skinny people. It's the bulk of our population. So, all that being said, the problem with most of the stuff that's out there that gives you all of these guideline poses, they don't work for every body type. That's the big problem. At the end of the day, if you're going to photograph people, you've got to learn to pay attention to body language. You've got to learn to interact with your subject, and you've got to learn to be able to control your subject. And I don't mean like sit still, not that kind of control. Mind you, sometimes it comes down to that. But I mean control the subject in a sense of keeping them engaged, keeping them relaxed, being able to get them to do the things that you want them to do. That's the key, okay? So, you don't want to forget that piece of the learning. You could find a bunch of like, here's a sample pose. For me, I tried to break it down to kind of like, what are the little things that will help me work with them? So for kids, the bottom line is if you've got kids in your shot, they've got to be getting more attention than anybody else. So the best thing you can do is start out, give the attention to the adults if it's a family shot. Let the adults know what the game plan is and basically tell them to chill. And then you gotta jump in, and at that point your attention's gotta go with the kids. Troy, you got that quote right. That's my breathing is totally optional quote. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sit still, don't move. Breathing is totally optional, but don't move. The only time that really happens for me is in my beauty shots, because sometimes, I'm doing a beauty shot, and if I've gone crazy with the lighting, it's one of those scenarios where if the model turns like half an inch, her nose is going to light up because of a rim light that's back here. So that's when I will roll out that line. But certainly if I want the model to look relaxed, I can't roll out that line because even though it's a joke, that's not going to work. So, Brent, I hope that helps a little bit. But honestly, with kids, for me, keep them occupied. Keep their attention. Try to find things either for them to do with their hands or put them in situations where they're using their hands to support themselves, to rest. Even if it's like in a group shot. Now, if you're shooting out in a park, it might be a little different. But maybe you're doing a group shot, a family group shot, and they're near a park bench. Put the kid like near the end of the bench, put their hands on the bench and tell them, keep your hands on the bench. Done. Now you've actually given them a task. Say, okay, look, I need you to hold on to the bench. So you've given them a task. And that's going to help you, kind of deal with that randomness of the hands. Okay? All right. So gang, let me get one more question in here tonight. And I promise you, my assistant Chad has been very good at grabbing all of your questions. So even though a lot of them have scrolled by in the chat, I've got a document here that's got all the questions. So here's what I'm going to do. Since this was the first one, I had no idea how this was going to work out tonight. And you guys have been like awesome with the questions. Any questions that I don't get to tonight, I am going to save, and I'll start next Wednesday answering those questions. I'll try and, kind of condense them into a smaller group of questions, and I'll start with those until people start posting questions, and then we'll pick up from there. So let me just get one more here, and I want to. I'm going to take this one honestly because it's a bit of an easy answer, and it's mainly because I can't answer this person's question the way they asked it. So, Martine, in your opinion, what is the best camera settings for outdoor portraiture? Martine, that's not a question you should ever ask. So let me explain. The first thing I would recommend you do if you're looking to do outdoor portraiture is I want you to go watch a video of mine. Let me switch over here to my YouTube channel. And the video you're going to watch is this one right here, How to Shoot Great Portraits in Bright Sunlight, which is actually a little misleading because really what the video is saying, hey, if you're working in bright sunlight, don't shoot in bright sunlight, find shade. That's what it's finding. But watch that video. It's going to give you a lot of really, really good tips for shooting outdoors in bright sunlight. From there, if I tell you camera settings, and believe me, you'll find people will gladly give you camera settings. But if I tell you camera settings, the problem of it is, depending on your circumstances, how bright the light is the person facing the sun? Is the person not facing the sun? Is there shade? What's the background light? Is the background brighter? Is the background darker? What lens are you using? What ISO you set at? All that stuff. What lenses, what lens do you have? The problem is, it's not necessarily going to work for you. So the way you come up with the right settings for doing portraits, really, it doesn't matter that you're outdoors. It matters, are you using the right lens? You want to use a short to medium focal length lens at a minimum. You probably want to limit the depth of field in your shot if you're shooting a portrait, which means you need to be shooting wide open. Or, excuse me, well, gosh, did those words come out of my mouth? It doesn't mean you need to be shooting wide open. It means, though, that you do want to shoot with a wider aperture. Gosh, I can't believe I said that. And the lens is also going to help you limit depth of field. So these are all things that are actually going to control that decision. So, Martine, same as I told a couple people tonight, I will tell you, if you're just getting started and you're trying to learn some of this stuff, I would encourage you to join my Facebook group. In fact, let me show you guys, because I get the sense I've got some people in here tonight that are not members of my Facebook group. So before I sign off, I want to show you guys a little preview of what goes on in my Facebook group. Because at first glance, this is my Facebook group. It's the I Shoot People Photographers group. The link is in the description below. When you scroll through the wall in the Facebook group, it's like any other Facebook group. There's a bunch of pictures, random stuff. Okay, don't waste your time. Once you join, what I want you to do, number one, watch this video. It's mandatory. You need to watch that video. It tells you all about how the group works because this group is very different than most Facebook groups, and I'm very proud of that fact. But here's the cool part. Here's the secret sauce about my group. If you click on this Photos tab and you go through the wall here, you see these ads for TogChat? I delete them after every TogChat, so they're only there for today. But let's say this. Here's this picture of a pretty girl, and this looks like an outdoor portrait, Martine. So let's just say you're looking at this and thinking, I really like this shot. If you click on that shot, yeah, you've got some random niceties that Andrea has posted here, but what you're also getting is all this, and actually, I picked a really bad post. Andrea, you let me down. Let's go down here. We'll look at this one. I know because I talked about this one last night. So here's a nice outdoor portrait. Look at all the detail that this photographer has provided us, talking about why they did the shot the way they did it, what problems did they have to solve, what obstacles did they encounter, all the camera settings, all the specs. So what's cool is, depending on the kind of photography you want to do, you can scroll through here, and when you see a picture, say, oh, you know what, I really like this, I want to do something like this, you can read all about, look at all the information that the photographers provide. So really what we're doing, and I'm not doing the hard work, all of these photographers doing it. We've got over 6,000 members. They're creating an encyclopedia of how to take great people pictures. So you can go through it. You can find the kinds of images that you like to do and then simply click, boom, and you've got all the detail. So that's what's cool about my Facebook group. And I would encourage you to join it if you have not done so yet. Okay? So, gang, listen. thank you for hanging out for the evening. Hey, if you haven't done so already, please take a second and make sure that you like the video. It would be greatly appreciated. And when the video's over, it would also be appreciated if you would take a second and put a comment in the comment section below, not here in the chat window. And of course, if you're not a YouTube subscriber, please make sure that you subscribe. I do 3 of these Talk Chats every week, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Plus, I post 2 videos every week. And then, of course, you can find me on all the usual social media places, okay? So, guys, listen, I really appreciate you all hanging out tonight. I hope that you will be here for TogChat and marketing tomorrow night. Some of you had some questions about pricing, about marketing. Make sure you check out the Thursday Talk Chats, okay? So I told you guys, in case you weren't here in the beginning, but if you were here in the beginning, you saw we had a new intro. Well, we've also got a new outro, and these are works in progress. They're not completely done. But with that being said, I'm going to say good night.
Thanks for watching another live episode of TogChat. Now, go pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot is your next shot. So keep learning, keep thinking, and keep shooting. Adios.